The crying started somewhere over the Pacific. Small, desperate, relentless. And every single person on that plane pretended not to hear it. Not because it wasn't loud. It was. The sound cut through the cabin like something broken. A high, trembling wail that climbed and never quite came down. Passengers shifted in their seats. Flight attendants exchanged glances. A man in 14C put in both earbuds and turned toward the window. Nobody moved. Because of him. Kangmin Jae sat in the front row of first class like a man who had never once been told no. His suit was dark and perfectly pressed. His hands rested on the armrests with the kind of stillness that only came from complete control. Two men flanked him. Not seated, just standing. Even though the seatbelt sign had been on for 11 minutes. No one told them to sit down. He was not famous. Not in the way that put faces on magazine covers. He was famous in the way that emptied rooms. Famous in the way that made immigration officers suddenly find something else to look at. In Seoul, in Tokyo, in 3 cities along the eastern seaboard, his name was spoken like a warning. And right now, that man was holding a baby girl who would not stop crying. Her name was Hannah. 7 months old. Round face, soft curls, tiny fists clenched so tight her knuckles had gone pale. She had been crying since the plane lifted off the ground in Los Angeles, and now they were somewhere above open water, and she was still going. A flight attendant had offered warm milk. Rejected. Another had tried a pacifier, a soft toy, a gentle song hummed under her breath. Each attempt lasted about 40 seconds before Hannah's cries climbed higher and the flight attendant backed away with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. Kangmin Jae's jaw was tight. He was not a man built for this. His empire was built on precision, on control, on silence where silence was needed. He understood boardrooms and basements and the particular quiet that fell when he walked into either one. He did not understand this. He did not understand why she kept crying. He did not understand why nothing worked. He did not understand why looking at her, her small wet face, her shaking lip, made something behind his ribs pull in a way he didn't have a name for. He bounced her once. She screamed louder. One of his guards leaned down and murmured something low. Min Jae did not respond. Passengers had stopped pretending to be asleep. A few were watching openly now. Not because they had forgotten who he was, but because the baby's crying had crossed a threshold that made forgetting easier than caring. A woman 2 rows back covered her ears. A man near the aisle pressed his forehead into his palm. Nobody moved to help. Nobody was going to. In the 23rd row, in economy class, a woman named Amara sat very still with a paperback open in her lap and her eyes on the front of the cabin. She wasn't watching the baby the way the others were. Not with irritation or pity or nervous curiosity. She was watching differently. Studying. The way you study something you already understand but need to confirm. She had heard babies cry before. She knew the sound of hunger, of gas, of overtiredness, of plain stubbornness. She knew the cry that meant nothing was wrong, just frustration with the world. This wasn't that. This baby wasn't crying because she was hungry. She wasn't crying because she was tired. She was crying the way Amara had once cried in a hospital hallway at 2 in the morning, not for anything that could be fixed, but out of something deeper. Something felt. She was afraid. Amara closed her book slowly. Around her, the overhead lights buzzed. Hannah's cries filled the cabin like water filling a sinking room. The flight attendants had retreated to the galley. The guards stood like statues. Kangmin Jae stared straight ahead, holding the baby with arms that didn't know how to be soft, and the baby screamed and screamed because she felt every bit of that tension pouring off him like heat. Amara placed her book in the seat pocket. She unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood up. The man beside her looked at her like she had lost her mind. She didn't look back at him. She moved up the aisle slowly, steadily, past the drawn curtain, past the eyes of every person on the plane who had just gone very, very quiet. The guard nearest the aisle saw her first. His hand moved. Amara didn't slow down. She walked directly toward the most dangerous man on the plane, and she didn't look afraid of a single thing. She didn't ask. That was the part that would replay in Min Jae's mind for days afterward. She didn't introduce herself, didn't explain, didn't look at his guards or wait for permission or do any of the things that people did when they came into his space. She simply reached out her arms and took Hannah. The cabin held its breath. The guard to Min Jae's left moved so fast the air shifted. Hand out, body forward, eyes locked. Min Jae raised 2 fingers. Just 2. And the guard stopped like a man who had walked into a wall. Min Jae watched her. The woman held Hannah against her chest, close and deliberate. She turned the baby slightly inward, away from the lights, away from the open space of the cabin. She pressed her lips close to the baby's ear and said something no one else could hear. Her hand moved in slow, firm circles on Hannah's back. Not frantic, not performative. Like she had done this 10,000 times in a room where no one was watching. Hannah hiccuped. The crying climbed once more. A last protest, a final gasp. And then, like a door swinging shut, it stopped. The silence was almost physical. A woman near the back of first class exhaled so loudly it came out as a half laugh. Someone else let their head fall back against their seat. Even the ambient hum of the engines seemed to grow louder now that there was nothing competing with it. Min Jae had not moved. He was watching the woman's face. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking only at Hannah, who had gone completely slack against her shoulder. Small fingers curled loosely against the woman's collarbone. Eyes heavy and blinking slow. She was overstimulated, the woman said quietly. Not to the cabin. To him. Too much light. Too much noise. She could feel your tension. Babies always can. Min Jae studied her the way he studied everything. Not with expression, but with attention. Full, complete attention. You took something that wasn't yours to take. I helped something that needed help. She glanced at him then. Direct. Unhurried. Those aren't the same thing. He said nothing. That was unusual. The people around him had learned that silence from him meant many things, none of them comfortable. But she didn't fill it with apologies or nervous backpedaling. She simply looked at him and then looked back at Hannah, and the baby sighed a deep, shuddering sigh and closed her eyes. The guard behind Min Jae bent low and spoke in Korean, fast and quiet. Min Jae's eyes didn't leave the woman's face. She had a quiet kind of beauty. Not loud, not decorated, just precise. High cheekbones. Dark skin that caught the overhead light warm. She wore a plain white button-down and jeans and no jewelry except small gold studs in her ears. She looked like someone who had learned long ago that the world didn't require her to be anything she wasn't. What's your name? Min Jae asked. Amara. Where are you going, Amara? Seoul. He paused. A short pause, but a real one. Business? Personal. The guard behind him whispered again. This time Min Jae glanced back. A single look, permission granted. The guard straightened and moved toward the rear of the plane. Min Jae returned his gaze to Amara. You're not afraid of me, he said. No, most people are. I know. She shifted Hannah gently against her shoulder. But Hannah needed someone to not be afraid. So I'm not. For the first time in the conversation, something crossed his face that wasn't calculation. It was small. Barely a flicker. Gone before it could be named. He leaned back and looked at the ceiling, and the silence between them became something different. Not hostile, not comfortable. Something in between. 3 rows behind them, Min Jae's guard was standing in the aisle with a phone in his hand and his eyes moving fast across the screen. Amara Nkosi. 34. American Nigerian. Medical background. Currently living in Chicago. One previous trip to Seoul, 4 years ago. The guard's eyes stopped. He looked up. Looked at the back of Min Jae's head. Looked at the woman holding the baby. Then he looked back at the screen, at the file attached to her name, at the company she had worked for 4 years ago. A company that no longer existed. A company that had been swallowed quietly, completely, into the infrastructure of the Qing Empire without a single public record to prove it had ever been touched. He closed the screen slowly and walked back to report to his boss. The file landed on the tray table between them like a verdict. Min Jae had dismissed the guards to the rear of the section. It was just the two of them now. Him, her, and Hannah sleeping peacefully against Amara's chest with one tiny fist pressed to her own cheek. The lights in the cabin had dimmed for the overnight stretch. Most passengers were asleep or pretending to be. Min Jae opened the file, slid it toward her. Amara looked down at it. Her expression didn't change. That was the thing about her face. It didn't perform. It simply reflected what was true. And right now what was true was that she wasn't surprised. Meridian Health Solutions, he said. You were a pediatric specialist there. I was. For 2 years. 2 years and 4 months. And then the company closed. He paused. Suddenly, she lifted her eyes from the file to his face. Did it close? Or did it disappear? The distinction was small and exact, and it landed between them like a stone in still water. Min Jae leaned forward slightly. You came to Seoul 4 years ago to investigate. I came to Seoul to find out what happened to the children. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything neither of them had said yet. Meridian had run 3 pediatric research programs across Chicago's South Side. Experimental wellness initiatives, nutritional studies, sleep disorder assessments in children under 3. The families who enrolled were told it was voluntary, non-profit, government-partnered. They were given gift cards and reassurance and printed brochures with stock photos of smiling children. Then Meridian's funding structure shifted. Quietly, across 17 shell companies in 4 countries, the programs ended overnight. No explanation. No follow-up care. No files transferred to the family's regular physicians. 41 children had been enrolled. One of them had been Amara's daughter. She said it quietly, without decoration. The way people said true things they had said so many times they had learned to carry them without breaking. Her name was Zoe. She was 14 months old. She had been in the sleep study for 6 weeks when the program ended. 3 months later, she died. Min Jae did not look away. The medical examiner listed it as sudden cardiac event. Unexplained. Amara's voice was still level. Still quiet. But I had her records. The records Meridian gave me. And I had a friend who was a pharmacologist. And what she found in those records, she paused. Just a breath. Did not match a spontaneous cardiac event in a healthy child. The plane shifted. Subtle turbulence. The kind that barely rocked you and then passed. Hannah stirred slightly. Amara's hand moved automatically, settling on the baby's back, and Hannah quieted. Min Jae watched that. His eyes dropped to his daughter's face. Relaxed now, open, trusting. And something moved through him that he didn't try to name. You can't prove a connection to my organization, he said. Not yet. You've been trying for 4 years. Yes. And you're on this plane. Yes. He studied her for a long moment. The air between them was dense with everything unsaid. Threat, grief, power, history. He had ended conversations like this in rooms with no windows. He had made problems disappear with a word. He was not a man who tolerated loose ends, and she was the definition of one. And yet, he looked at Hannah again, at the way she slept on this woman's chest like she had always known her, like something in the baby's body had recognized something in Amara's and simply decided, safe. Why didn't you run, he asked. When my guard showed you that file, why didn't you pretend? Amara looked at him evenly. Because pretending hasn't worked. And because, she looked down at Hannah. Your daughter isn't responsible for what your empire has done. She just needed someone to hold her. Min Jae sat very still for a very long time. Outside the windows, the sky had turned the deep and endless dark that only existed above the ocean at cruising altitude. No stars. No horizon. Just the hum of the engines and the weight of everything between them. Then the intercom clicked on. A soft chime. The pilot's voice, calm and professional. We will begin our descent into Incheon in approximately 40 minutes. Local time is 6:12 in the morning. Min Jae straightened, adjusted the cuff of his jacket, looked at his guard, who had appeared silently at the curtain. He said one sentence. Quiet. Absolute. Bring her with us. Seoul arrived the way it always did for Min Jae. Efficiently, without ceremony. Black cars on the tarmac. No passport lines. A private exit through a corridor that the airport had built for people who needed the world to pretend they weren't there. Men in dark coats moved in quiet coordination. Bags were collected. Doors were opened. Amara walked through all of it like she was watching from a distance, present but not impressed. She held Hannah against her shoulder, and Hannah held on. She was not handcuffed, not threatened, not searched. She had half expected all three. Instead, she was placed in the second car with a guard who didn't speak and a window that showed her the city waking up in gray-blue light. Apartment towers and the Han River and the first orange threads of sunrise breaking across the skyline. The compound was not what she had imagined. She had imagined cold, glass and steel and the architecture of control. But the estate sat behind high walls and old trees, and inside, the rooms were warm. There were books stacked on actual shelves. A kitchen that smelled of doenjang jjigae and fresh rice. A nursery that had been built with such careful attention. Pale wood, soft mobiles, light that came and filtered in golden, that it almost hurt to look at. Someone had built that room with love. She wondered who. Min Jae appeared in the doorway while she was settling Hannah into the crib. He watched without speaking until the baby was down and still. Her mother died, he said. Simply. As if saying it simply made it bearable. 6 weeks after she was born. An accident. A pause. I have been told I am not equipped for this. You're not, Amara said. But you're trying. She knows the difference. He crossed his arms and leaned against the doorframe. In the soft light of the nursery he looked different than he had on the plane. Not smaller. Just more visible. The weight of what he was carrying showed more clearly here. The investigation you've been running, he said. Tell me what you have. She looked at him. I'm not asking you to stop, he said. I'm asking you to show me. The pause between them lasted long enough to mean something. Why? She asked. He looked at Hannah for a moment. Because I built something, and for a long time I only looked at what it built, not what it cost. He turned back to Amara. I need to know what it cost. It was not an apology. It was too precise for that, too deliberate. But it was something true, and she had spent 4 years listening for true things in the spaces between official statements and closed files. Over the next 3 days, she told him. Not everything. Not the pieces that could be weaponized against her. But enough. The names of the children. The structure of the shell companies as she had traced them. Incomplete, imprecise, but directionally damning. The pharmacologist's analysis. The gaps in the records she had never been able to fill. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He asked 2 questions. Both of them were good questions. The kind that came from actually following what was being said. On the second evening he summoned 2 of his senior men and dismissed them both within 20 minutes. She didn't ask what had been said, but one of them looked at her differently when he left. Hannah had stopped letting other people hold her. It was becoming a logistical complication. She cried when the nanny took her in the mornings and stopped the moment Amara entered the room. Min Jae's housekeeper had begun setting a second place at the dining table without being told. On the 4th morning, Min Jae found Amara in the library at 6 in the morning with her laptop open and her case files spread across the reading table. Everything she had carried into this world laid out in the open like she had stopped trying to hide it. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. You knew I would see these eventually, he said. Yes. Then why stay? Amara looked up from the screen. The early light came through the high windows and fell across the table, across the files, across 4 years of everything she had carried alone. Because Zoe deserved someone who didn't stop, she said. And because, she looked at him steadily. I think somewhere inside you, you already know what your people did. And I think you brought me here because part of you wants someone to make you face it. Kang Min-jae, who had sat across from government ministers and rival bosses and men who had tried to kill him 3 separate times, had no answer for that. He walked to the table, pulled out the chair across from her, sat down. Show me the shell company structure from the beginning, he said quietly. All of it. And she did. What Kang Min-jae did not yet understand, what he could not yet see, was that the woman sitting across from him wasn't just holding evidence of what his empire had cost. She was holding enough to bring it down, and she hadn't decided yet what she was going to do with it.
But that wasn't the part Kang Min-jae failed to understand. Not yet, because the most dangerous shift had already happened, quietly, without his permission. His daughter had chosen her. And that was something even he couldn't control, something he couldn't command, something he couldn't take back, and that choice was about to cost him everything. Thank you for watching. And subscribe to Mafia Love HQ if this story pulled you in. Then you're not ready for what happens next. Because in part 2, the truth behind his empire begins to surface. And Amara gets closer to something she was never supposed to find.